Здравствуйте, уважаемые друзья, зрители телеканала Медиаинформ. Вы знаете, традиционно я приглашаю в студию к себе на интервью известных политиков, премьер-министров, министров, которые влияют на политику страны, политику Европы. Но вот сегодня у меня в гостях не политик, но тем не менее гость, который, безусловно, влияет на умы современности, и человек, который, безусловно, уже вошел в историю европейской культуры. Это известный швейцарский драматург, европейский драматург Лукас Берфус. Здравствуйте, мистер Берфус.
Thank you for having me.
Mr. Berfus, when I was talking about you, I mentioned that for sure you're already in the history of European continent, not only in the Swiss history, and obviously such people as you influence Europeans' minds for sure. Yeah. And I would like to start our conversation with your aim, why you came to Odessa, what is your impression about our city. Сперва я хотел бы спросить у мистера Берфуса о его впечатлениях об Одессе.
Yeah, first of all, I had an invitation from Ulrich Schreiber and Hans Ruprecht, the two persons organizing this tremendous festival here. I have an invitation to the National Theatre to lead a workshop. I spent 5 years ago 2 weeks in Odessa, and my impressions are very well. I like the people, they are very open-minded. I like the city, which is part of Europe, I have the impression. It's so French-influenced, if you like, so it's really a tremendous place.
Я прибыл в Одессу по приглашению, я очень люблю Одессу. Одесса, безусловно, очень красивый такой европейский город, и мне очень приятно здесь находиться. Mr. Berfus, I read your biography very carefully, and I read recommendations, reviews of your novel, The Sexual Neurosis of Our Parents. And it is really very interesting because actually, as far as I understand, there are two plots. Yeah, one plot is on the cover. Yeah, and another plot is underneath of the cover. Yeah, so it seems that you're talking about liberty. It seems that you're talking about losing constraints for a person, which nowadays life impose on the person. And it is really important because now when we face the pandemic, when we face these constraints, and it seems that states start to, on a good excuse, but they start to monitor the lives of daily lives of people, this is still a problem. We are losing ourselves and we are losing our freedom. It really, it really shortens. So you wrote this novel 13 years ago. Now it became more actual. Did you foresee 13 years ago that in 13 years, in the long run, we will face even less freedom than it used to be 13 years ago? Господин Берфус, я читал ваши те ревью, рекомендации о вашем произведении «Неврозы наших родителей», в котором вы говорите о потере свободы. Есть общий сюжет, а есть сюжет, который действительно, он как бы идет красной нитью по произведению. Вы говорите о потере свободы, о сокращении свободы. Действительно, это актуально в связи с пандемией, в связи с усилением роли государств. На фоне коронавирусных ограничений. Вы опубликовали ваш роман 13 лет назад, но сейчас он стал более актуальным. Могли ли вы предвидеть 13 лет назад, что через 13 лет мы получим еще больше сокращения человеческих свобод?
That's a very good question. Indeed, I think that there is some prophetical thing in literature. That doesn't mean that I'm a prophet. But if you're writing about such complicated issues, you really have to be very sensible on what's going on. So that that a novel or a play is still actual after this long time is something that we see quite a lot, because we are talking about human nature. And human nature doesn't change that much in this short period. But you were talking about freedom and liberty, and I think that's a very complicated notion, because it's not only the individual freedom and liberty that is really important, but also the liberty of a society, of the two of us as a group. And there is this proverb saying that one's freedom ends where the other one's freedom starts. So I think that, because you were mentioning the pandemic, I think that in a pandemic, we really should think carefully about our ideas we have of liberty and of freedom, because you can't use your liberty when you're dead. So health and life is really preliminary.
Безусловно, литература всегда является в какой-то степени пророческой. Очень важно чувствовать время, очень важно чувствовать жизнь, когда ты пишешь какой-то роман, ты предсказываешь будущее. Конечно, вот вы упомянули о свободе, индивидуальной, прежде всего, свободе в связи с пандемией, но я бы поговорил о коллективной свободе, о свободе вот в рамках вот условной группы, вот я и вы, о свободе в обществе, потому что есть и расхожее выражение, что свобода одного человека заканчивается там, где начинается свобода другого человека. И, конечно, здесь очень важно, как соотносятся эти свободы, особенно учитывая то, что, говоря о коронавирусе, о пандемии, вот самое главное — это жизнь и здоровье. И, безусловно, человек может быть свободным только в том случае, если он живой. Mr. Берфус, you are a great admirer of the theater. And, you know, there are different levels, different ways how the person can become famous. And you chose the most difficult one, yeah. To become famous in the theater, you really have to be very talented, and you're very talented. Why you are such a great admirer of the theater, and why do you think that still the theater represent a great heaven, maybe a great retreat for people where they can escape to save themselves? Мистер Берфус, я знаю, что вы большой фан театра, и, конечно, реализовать себя в театре как драматург намного сложнее, чем в других сферах. Вы выбрали очень тяжелую дорогу. Почему вы считаете, что театр настолько актуален и помогает людям сохранить свою внутреннюю свободу и убежать от реальности будничного мира?
First of all, I don't think that it was my first goal to become famous. I wanted just to do what I love the most. And what I love the most is to write and is to read. And there is another thing I really love, it's people. And it's to work very closely with other people. And I think in the theater you have both things. You have literature, you have the word, you have the thoughts, you have the art. But on the other hand, it's a very social thing. You have to be very communicative, you have to do politics all the time, because a text written for the theater doesn't stay like you have written it. It has to change, and because the directors, the actors, everybody has its own impression of the text. So there is a lot of talking, there's a lot of discussion, not only about the text, but about fundamental things about human life. And I think that's the case for everybody who is going to the theater, that we see that we have both a concrete reality in the theater, but on the other hand we have imagination, we have thoughts, we have all the immaterial things, and to have this in one place is really tremendous.
So can I make such comparison, which I think can describe what you just talked, that you give a birth to a child to the novel, and then for you it's very interesting how it progresses, how it's developed, which skills, which characteristics it adopts.
Absolutely, that's the thing in theater with a play, because what you write, you want to share. It doesn't belong to yourself. Everybody who is working in the theater wants to share something. And I think that's a really precious and important thing, especially in our societies, in our very economic, possessive societies, to do something that doesn't belong to you.
Мистер Берфус говорит о том, что изначально он не стремился к тому, чтобы стать знаменитым, он просто хотел писать, ему очень хотелось писать. И, конечно, для него театр всегда представлял большой интерес, потому что театр — это не только сюжет, это еще и коммуникация, это обмен, лингвистический обмен, это обмен словами. Вообще театр в нынешнюю эпоху собственничества играет очень важную роль, потому что в театре люди обмениваются, в театре ничего не принадлежит никому, и вот все является общим. И это, конечно, играет очень большую роль. Я спросил мистера Берфуса, можно ли сравнить его отношение к театру и вообще к его романам, как к ребенку, которому он дает жизнь и дальше наблюдает за его эволюцией, какими характеристиками вот наделяется его ребенок, и вот это представляет интерес для него, как вот для вот человека искусства. И мистер Берфус с этим согласился, что, конечно, вот любое произведение проходит определенные стадии вот интерпретации, оно наделяется какими-то новыми образами, и вот в этом его вот дополнительный смысл. Mr. Berfus, we want to be separated from the politics, and regular life of the people usually, does not depend on politics, but still our daily life affected by the politics. And I would like to ask you about the statecraft, the quality of statecraft, the quality of man who runs this world in different countries. I think now, despite the progress that we made, we have the worst statecraft as it used to be even 50, even 100 years ago, because many politicians even don't know the road to the theater, or they go to the theater not because they admire theater, but because they want to take photos for their Instagram and for their Facebook. Is it really a problem that nowadays politicians, they are so far away from the culture? Мистер Берфус, конечно, невозможно не поговорить о политике. Сейчас наблюдается, как мне кажется, ухудшение вообще искусства управления государством. Во многом политики, они стали хуже, чем 50-100 лет назад. И они дистанцированы от театра. Если они даже идут в театр, то для того, чтобы сделать селфи и потом разместить в Инстаграме и в Фейсбуке. Насколько это вообще является проблемой?
Yeah, I think you are right. There is really an absence of a lot of important people in literature and in theater as well. But I think that is due to this variety we have today. When I remember back in my childhood, there was just one television and it never worked, and there was only 3 channels, I guess. So I felt on the books and on the theater just naturally, because there were nothing else. Today we have such a variety of beautiful movies, series, the quality rised, that's the case. So the theater is no longer standing alone. But there is one thing that is still unique in the theater. Theater is always live. You have to be present, you have to be there, you have to participate, you have to share your time and your body, in fact, with all the people in the room. And I think that is a really unique and important thing, because every other thing you can download. You know, you can download books, you can download series, but theater you can't. download?
I actually watched one of your videos on YouTube where you just, reflected about this issue, about the theater in the pandemic. This video was recorded in the December last year, and where you just talked about this issue. So as far as I understand, the pandemic revealed that you can't participate in the theater via Zoom or via Skype.
No, I think there is really an important thing to understand, that a political change is only possible with physical bodies. Okay, and when you have a government representing the people, when these people comes together on one place all at once, you call it a revolution. So this absent body of this represented people comes together in the theater. That makes theater a very dangerous and powerful thing, because it's a crowd coming together.
Very interesting statement. Мистер Берфус вспомнил свое детство, когда было всего 3 канала, и, конечно, за это время расширился спектр возможностей получения информации. Но весь этот спектр возможностей получения информации, он так или иначе связан с дистанционным получением информации. Только в театре, только театр создает возможности, когда люди могут группироваться, когда они могут делить свои, присутствовать своими телами и душами в театре. И это создает уникальную атмосферу, да, вот единение, уникальную атмосферу синхронности. И, конечно, во многом пандемия, она показала, что всю уникальность театра, потому что театр в каком-то своем роде представляет пример того, как люди объединяются, пример того, как люди делают политику, потому что политика как раз это и есть сообщество людей, которые собираются ради чего-то, и поэтому театр во многом представляет угрозу для политиков, потому что театры — это место, где люди могут собираться душами, телами, и вот эта общность людей, она как раз и делает революцию, делает историю.
But let me add this. I'm sure that it was very important to close the theater for a certain time during this pandemic. And it was very important to take care of the other people, because this crowd were dangerous at the moment. Not only dangerous like it used to be for a political system, but dangerous through this virus for everybody else. I think we should not mix these two things. We should not take the pandemic to talk about the importance of a political crowd. It was an exception. We have to deal it like an exception or like an unusual thing, and to try to go back to normal as soon as possible, but not sooner. That's very important.
Я хотел бы еще раз акцентировать внимание, что когда мы говорим о пандемии, действительно было важно закрыть на какое-то время театр, потому что все-таки с учетом пандемии это представляло опасность для здоровья людей. И, конечно, не нужно политизировать театры. Все-таки вопрос закрытия театра в условиях пандемии — это было исключение, допустимое исключение. И нужно сделать все, чтобы вернуться к этой привычной нормальности, но не раньше, чем действительно это можно сделать с учетом безопасности и здоровья людей. Mr. Berfus, when we talk about cultural, usually culture unites people. And I think that, usually politicians, they talk about the economy, they talk about politics, but culture really something that unites people. And something which makes people together beyond borders. Culture does not know visas. Culture does not know any restrictions on the movement of people. Does Europe now culturally more united than it used to be before? Mr. Берфус, культура — это что-то, что объединяет людей. А культура не знает виз, культура не знает границ. Можно ли говорить о том, что культура сейчас объединяет Европу больше, чем она объединяла ее там когда-то еще 50 лет назад?
Yeah, I think you're right. Culture, literature, especially, isn't bound in borders. It isn't bound to a nationality. I was always amazed that before I had a name, even, I already had a nationality. You know, I was given my passport or my citizenship before I had a name. As a writer, as a cultural person, I don't think in these frames. I'm trying to, I don't know, I grew up with all this tremendous literature from all the world. And I'm not sure if we are still progressing to really tear down all the walls between us. I have the impression that we are separating us from each other. And this is something not only due to a political system, but also to a technological evolution, in fact. Because you have all these really smart things with you, okay? You are, when you are in a bus, when you are in a restaurant, you are looking in these phones, in these tablets, in these computers, and you are not present where you are. So you are not getting in touch with the people around you. And I think that what disturbs me the most. I love technology. I think that's a tremendous thing. But I also love to get in touch really in the moment, on the spot. And culture is always there, I guess. It's always present.
Мистер Берфус говорит о том, что еще в момент своего рождения он приобрел национальность, гражданство раньше, чем приобрел имя. И, конечно, здесь до сих пор остаются очень многие такие национальные разночтения, и культуре пока не удалось уничтожить все стенки, все как бы барьеры, которые разграничивают государство. Учитывая ту дигитализацию, появление электронных гаджетов и так далее, которые, в принципе, являются абсолютно нормальным трендом, мы сейчас имеем определенную тоже сепарацию людей, когда люди могут электронно присутствовать не в том месте, где находятся их души и тела. Это большая проблема. И, конечно, при всем преимуществе, которое нам дают технологии, тем не менее, люди за счет этого, за счет современных технологий, то есть современные технологии мешают людям объединяться.
But I want to answer your question, but because your question was, does Europe enough to overcome all these borders and to put value on culture? I have to ask you back, what's Europe? Is it the European Union? As a Swiss citizen, it's quite complicated to talk about the European Union because we are not a member, so it's I don't have rights there. Is it a continent? Which continent? Is it the north, the south? So there is such a plurality. But I think that it's better to ask what you can do, what our generation can do to overcome these borders, and not to delegate it to some corporation, to some political organization, but to ask yourself in your daily life, what can you do to overcome all these barriers, all these frontiers, and all this gap between people?
Я хочу задать вам такой встречный риторический вопрос. Что вы понимаете под Европой? Это что Европейский Союз? Например, Швейцария не является частью Европейского Союза. Мы говорим о Северной Европе, мы говорим о Южной Европе. Здесь это достаточно сложный вопрос, что мы понимаем под Европой. И, конечно, нужно четко осознавать, что мы должны не делегировать каким-то крупным корпорациям, крупным объединениям вопрос будущего Европы. Это будущее зависит от каждого из нас, от нашего поведения, как мы относимся друг к другу. Mr. Berfus, you published a very famous novel, 100 Days. This is a very important novel because it not only deals with the war and crimes, it also deals with the reception of others people's pain, whom you don't know, who are from your different culture, but they are still human beings. And I think this is a great advantage of your novel. You see the great rise of right populism in Europe. You see how right-wing parties, they enter European Parliament, enter national parliaments. And there is a great populist, right populist movement in Europe. What do you think about reception of other people generally in Europe? Is still it friendly as it used to be, or there is still, as we say, political correctness, which impose on people to be polite and to be very helpful, but in reality, they are not ready to be polite and helpful. They just know that they have to act according to the rules. Мистер Берфус, у вас есть замечательное произведение «100 дней», в котором вы говорите как раз о войне и о жертвах войны. Но здесь есть еще одна плоскость. Это, конечно же, о восприятии жертв войны. Об этом произведении говорится о том геноциде, о той резне, которая была в Руанде. Вот насколько жители Европы, они разделяют вот ту боль, которые испытывают люди с совершенно другой культурой, которые находятся очень далеко, которые европейцы не часто понимают. Насколько вообще сейчас набирает влияние вот это правое движение, правый популизм, потому что мы видим вход этих партий в национальный парламент, в Европейский парламент. Можем ли мы говорить о том, что европейцы по-прежнему толерантны, либо они толерантны просто в силу того, что есть такие правила и необходимо действовать согласно закону?
In Switzerland, we live with this right-wing populists now for 30 years. The rise started 30 years ago. And so we learned a lot about it. We were in some kind the avant-garde of this movement in Switzerland, or we had this avant-garde in Switzerland. And one thing we learned is that it's not just a bad dream where you wake up someday and everything is over. It doesn't work like that. They won't go away. And the only thing you can do is to daily fight them, daily, okay, with your political means. And I think that in my case, in my generation, in Western Europe, my generation wasn't used to that, wasn't used to a political struggle and wasn't prepared for this political struggle. I think the reason why we have this extremism rising all over Europe are very different. It's a different thing in France than in Germany and then in Italy. And I think we are not really helpful to the case when we are trying to generalize all these movements. Of course, there are a lot of connections, but you can't say, for example, that it's something where you have a poor people with no jobs, no money. We haven't had that in Switzerland, you know? We were very rich, very wealthy, although we had this rise of this right-wing populists. Another thing is in France and in Germany and in Hungary as well. So you have to be very specific in your analysis of this movement to fight it.
So, as far as I understand, you consider, maybe I'm wrong, but as far as I understand, you consider the rise of right populism as something as we call kind of maybe, disease as a fact which human beings face during the life. So we don't need to be afraid of this type of disease, but we have to put the control on it.
I don't know. No, we should be worried, I guess. We should contain it. We should everybody who is loving freedom, freedom of speech, plurality, diversity, rights for women, rights for gay people, rights for everybody, equal rights for everybody. Who wants that should be worried, of course, but not be frightened too much, because angst isn't a very good advisor in this fight. You have to be smart and you have to analyze the situation. And I think it's a split between the capitalism we are seeing. In fact, it's the question, what's the nation? Okay, it's the rise of nationalism. Are you willing to have a global free trade or not? That's the split between we see now in our societies. And I think this identity thing is also very important, because in the globalization we often think that people lose their identity. We are not only global citizens, but we are also locals. And how does a society deal with that?
Конечно, здесь очень большой вопрос, он связан с взаимоотношениями между глобализмом и желанием сберечь какую-то свою идентичность, национальную идентичность. И это тот вопрос, который, в принципе, предстоит решать. Безусловно, вот вопрос возникновения и развития такого популистского движения, крайнего популизма, он знаком в Швейцарии, он продолжается последние 30 лет. И он, например, никак не связан с экономической ситуацией, потому что Швейцария — это очень преуспевающее государство, но между тем это все равно проблема, она существует. И, конечно, общество должно сделать все, чтобы принцип толерантности, принятия друг друга, принятия представителей и разных культур, и разных движений, вот, чтобы эта вот толерантность наросла, и общество принимало людей, да, не похожих на тебя. Это очень важно. Вот это вот такое вот культурное разнообразие. Mr. Берфус, we don't have much time left. I would like to ask you the question about political correctness. We now saw in the United States when, for instance, Facebook banned the president's statement, which was made by Trump, other social medias. Even though we don't discuss the Trump as a politician, we discuss the principle: is it possible for social networks, for instance, to block you? Yeah, also, what I see as a serious problem is a political correctness when there are some topics now in Europe, or especially in the United States, which you can't discuss publicly, because immediately you will face the criticism, which will be fueled by the media, and at the end of the day, it can destroy the careers, the person's career. And it reminds me something which Anna Arendt, the famous German scientist, called the totalitarianism. Yeah, it's type of totalitarianism, but 21st century totalitarianism. When you can't discuss some topics publicly, when you feel ashamed to discuss this, what to do with this? How to maintain the liberty, and how on the long road for the championing and protection of human rights, not to become a totalitarist who restrict and ban the discussion of, let's say, some topics which they find are not, publicly accessible, let's say.
I think these are two different things, because you are talking about the power of the social media, of Instagram, Facebook, whatever. And I think that's really a problem. I think we gave them too much power. And there wasn't any fight against this shift from traditional media to social media. And now we have this cluster. Very few people are deciding for a lot of people. And that's never a good thing, I guess. So we should try to democratize also the social media. Now, the question is what to publish. And I think we have laws. And what's within these laws should be legal. That doesn't mean that everything that's within these laws and that's legal is also polite and in a moment adequate. Because you have several informal rules. You say hello when you see somebody. You have all these informal things which are very important. And we can see that there is a progress in these informal things. We don't address people like we used to address them because they are insulted by the way we address people. So there is a learning process in the society. Is this learning process sometimes going too far? Of course, of course. And it have to be corrected, but in a way that is open-minded and accessible, like you said, to anybody. Anybody should be able to participate in this progress. And it's not okay to exclude people from a discussion. But I think we should not forget that the thing you call political correctness is in a movement of emancipation from people, although there are some things we don't like with it. And we should not confuse it with the problem we have with the social media, which are severe and which we have to oppose against.
Конечно, проблема социальных медиа серьезная, поскольку в движении от социальных медиа от обычных медиа к социальным медиа мы как-то не заметили, как социальные медиа перебрали на себя слишком много власти, когда отдельные люди могут решать за всех остальных, принимать решения за всех остальных, это, конечно, большая проблема. Если говорить о политической корректности, как принято говорить, да, политкорректности, вот, как принято говорить в западном дискурсе, конечно, это большая дорога обучения, дорога взаимопонимания, когда люди учатся коммуницировать между собой, опять же, в тех законодательных рамках, которые существуют в конкретном государстве. И здесь, конечно, есть вот здесь вот присутствует достаточно длинная дорога вот это вот прогрессивное обучение. Mr. Берфус, am I correct? So you're talking. So when we talk about political correctness, it means that it is something it's something which can be called as a good process in the long run. Yeah, but as each process, in the short run, it has advantages and disadvantages. But in the long run, it is a kind of education which each society has to complete.
Of course, and I think we should fight ideologies wherever we find them, okay? And the thing you call political correctness, which is not a very concrete and clear notion because it assembles a very lot of different things. But everything can become an ideology. What's an ideology? It's a closed system, not open for another opinion. And I think in a democratic and free discourse, you should always think that the other guy can be right.
И очень важно вот то, что говорит мистер Берфус, что все-таки, когда мы говорим о политкорректности, это, конечно, некий процесс обучения общества. И в процессе обучения общества могут быть и проблемы, могут быть некие вызовы, могут быть достижения, но в долгосрочной перспективе это абсолютно верная траектория движения. Единственное, что всегда необходимо бояться идеологии, потому что идеология — это закрытые системы. Необходимо бороться против идеологии. Необходимо понимать, что если у человека, другого человека, есть какое-то другое мнение, значит, возможно, этот человек прав. Mr. Берфус, thank you very much. It was a quite interesting discussion. Sorry for such maybe complicated questions, but
No, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
You know, there are some type of questions which can't be addressed to a regular person, and they have to wait the specific person. And I'm as a media anchor, I waited for such person as you who can address this question, who can reflect this question. And I'm very happy that I could ask this question.
It was a privilege. Thank you so much for having me.
Мистер Берфус, спасибо вам большое, что пришли в студию. Вы знаете, есть такие вопросы, которые нельзя задать каждому встречному гостю, и вот они же должны ждать своего часа. И вот я дождался, когда вы пришли в студию, поскольку вы именно тот человек, который смог ответить на эти вопросы. Мистер Берфус поблагодарил Медиаинформу, что сегодня вот выступил в нашей студии. Спасибо, уважаемые зрители, что сегодня были с нами на Медиаинформе.